The air still smelled like burning metal. Smoke drifted low across the ground, thick and bitter, stinging the eyes and throat. Somewhere nearby, something crackled. Wood, cloth, maybe both. A woman in a torn gray uniform knelt beside a man lying face down in the rubble. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his rank. She didn't even know which army he belonged to. But she rolled him over anyway. His chest moved. Barely. Behind her, another voice shouted in German. "More here." Then another voice answered in English. And neither of them stopped working. The bombing had ended only minutes ago. But there were no buildings left. No hospital. No camp. No order. Only ruins. And bodies. A stretcher scraped across broken stone. Someone cried out for water. Someone else whispered for their mother. The nurse pressed her hands against the man's wound. Her fingers were shaking, not from fear. From exhaustion. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Around her, prisoners of war, enemy soldiers, were now the only medical staff left alive. No guards were giving orders. No doctors were in charge. No one knew who was responsible anymore. And then she saw something that made her freeze. One of the wounded men was wearing the uniform of a unit that had captured her months earlier. The same unit. The same insignia. The same men who had marched her into captivity. Now he was bleeding in front of her. And he was asking her for help. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she reached for the bandages. Because the question wasn't whether he deserved help. The question was something far more dangerous. If there were no guards left, no officers, no command, then who was really in control of the camp now? The year was 1945. The war in Europe was collapsing. Cities were being bombed daily. Supply lines were broken. Command structures were failing. Entire regions were operating without clear authority. Across Allied territory, thousands of German prisoners of war were being held in temporary camps, many built quickly, many overcrowded, and most never designed for long-term use. Among the prisoners were medical personnel, doctors, orderlies, and nurses. Under the Geneva Convention, medical POWs were often required to continue treating the wounded, including enemy soldiers. But conditions were rarely ideal. Equipment was limited. Medicines were scarce. And tension was constant. Inside one particular camp, built near a railway junction and an industrial target, the routine had become predictable. Morning roll call. Ration distribution. Medical rounds. Quiet evenings. Too quiet. Because every night, the distant sound of aircraft could be heard overhead. At first, the bombs fell miles away. Then closer. Then one morning, a guard mentioned something quietly. The factories nearby are on the next target list. That evening, one of the supply trucks never arrived. The next day, the electricity failed for 2 hours. And that night, someone noticed something strange. The air raid siren didn't sound during a passing aircraft formation. No one reported it. But the nurses began sleeping in their boots. Because something didn't feel right. And 3 days later, the sky turned black. Her name was Anna Keller. She had been a surgical nurse before the war. Calm hands, precise movements, little patience for panic. She had been captured during the final retreat of her unit and transferred to the camp along with dozens of other medical personnel. At first, the work had been routine. Treat infections, change dressings, monitor malnutrition cases. Most of the patients were German prisoners. But occasionally, Injured Allied guards or local civilians were brought in. Anna never asked questions. She treated whoever was placed in front of her. Another nurse, Marta Weiss, worked beside her. Younger, quieter, always counting supplies, always worried about running out. Because they were already reusing bandages, already rationing disinfectant, already cutting tablets in half. Every evening, the nurses gathered in a small storage room to compare numbers. How many dressings left? How many patients stable? How many unlikely to survive the night? One evening, Marta whispered something. The guards removed some equipment today. Anna looked up. What equipment? The surgical tools, the better ones. No explanation had been given. The next morning, 2 guards were missing from their posts. No one mentioned it. But the prisoners noticed. And that afternoon, a low rumble passed overhead. No sirens. Just engines. Then silence. The quiet felt heavier than the noise. And Anna wrote something unusual in the medical log that night. Prepare for mass casualties. She didn't know why. But something was coming. The morning began strangely. No roll call. No ration truck. No officer inspection. The guards moved quickly, speaking in short sentences, avoiding eye contact. Around midday, Marta returned from the supply area. Her face was pale. They moved the fuel barrels, she said. Why? Anna asked. They didn't say. Then the first siren sounded. Long. Loud. Unbroken. The camp froze. Prisoners looked at the sky. Guards ran toward the perimeter. Then the second siren began. Closer. Urgent. Anna grabbed her emergency bag. Bandages. Morphine. Scissors. Outside, the air felt heavy. Then someone pointed upward. The aircraft were already overhead. There was no time for shelters. No time for orders. The first explosion hit beyond the camp. The ground shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Another explosion. Closer. Someone screamed. Then the bombing moved directly over them. And in seconds, the hospital building was gone. The blast threw Anna against a wall. For a moment, she couldn't hear anything. Only pressure. Then the sound returned all at once. Screaming. Crashing. Fire spreading through broken beams. She pushed herself up. The ward was open to the sky. Beds overturned. Patients buried in debris. Marta was already pulling someone free. Outside, she shouted. There was no hospital anymore. So they moved the wounded into the open road. Blankets became stretchers. Doors became operating tables. The bombing continued nearby. Each explosion sent dust across the improvised treatment area. More injured arrived every minute. Prisoners, guards, civilians from nearby houses. No one checked uniforms anymore. Anna worked continuously. Stop bleeding. Clear airways. Stabilize fractures. She used the last bottle of disinfectant within the first hour. After that, they used boiled water. Then just water. Then nothing. At one point, a British guard was carried in. Severe chest wound. He looked at Anna with fear. You're German, he whispered. Yes, she said. He hesitated. Then nodded. Help me anyway. She did. But as she worked, she noticed something disturbing. There were fewer guards now. Much fewer. And no officers. And no one giving orders. The camp structure was disappearing. And the bombing hadn't even finished. By evening, the aircraft were gone, but the fires continued to burn. Survivors began searching the ruins. The command building was destroyed. The radio station was gone. The guard barracks had taken a direct hit. Several senior officers were missing. No official authority remained inside the camp. A temporary meeting was held near the main gate. Allied guards, German medical POWs, local emergency volunteers. No one knew who was supposed to take control. So a decision was made. The medical staff, regardless of nationality, would organize the camp. Anna suddenly found herself coordinating treatment zones, triage area, surgical corner, recovery section. But during the head count, something didn't add up. Several prisoners were missing. Not dead. Missing. And the outer perimeter fence had been damaged during the bombing. That night, a guard asked quietly, "Did anyone leave?" No one answered, because no one had been watching. In the weeks after the incident, several reports were written, but they didn't agree. Theory 1: chaos allowed some prisoners to escape. The damaged perimeter, the missing guards, the confusion. But no escapees were ever officially recorded. Theory 2: some guards fled during the bombing. Survival over duty. If true, it meant the camp had been abandoned before the prisoners realized it. But the guard rosters were never released. Theory 3: the bombing target had not been the factories at all. Some documents suggested the railway junction near the camp was the primary objective, which meant the prison camp had been dangerously close to a major military target all along. But there was no warning given to the camp staff. And then there was the final mystery. Several medical logs written by Anna and the other nurses disappeared during the post-war archive process. Records of who was treated, who survived, and who died. Gone. Some historians believe the records showed extensive cooperation between enemy personnel, something politically inconvenient after the war. Others believe the files were simply lost. But no one knows for sure. Which raises the question: if the official records are incomplete, how much of what happened there was never reported at all? Years later, if you visited the area, you would not know anything had happened there. The road is smooth now. Straight. Ordinary. Cars pass without slowing. Farm equipment moves slowly across the fields on both sides, turning the soil that once held broken glass, twisted metal, and the remains of shattered buildings. There are no ruins anymore. No burned beams. No collapsed walls. No barbed wire. No guard towers. The land was cleared within months after the war ended. Bulldozers pushed everything into long trenches. Concrete, wood, steel, personal belongings, medical equipment, fragments of beds, pieces of door that had once been used as stretchers. All of it buried. Then the ground was leveled. New soil brought in. Grass planted. The camp disappeared. And with it, most of the physical evidence of what had happened during those final days. There is no signpost on the road. No marker for travelers. No stone with engraved names. No official memorial. Even local residents, decades later, often did not know a prisoner camp had ever stood there. To them, it was just another field. Just another quiet piece of countryside. But for those who were there, the place never became ordinary again. Survivors would later describe returning to the area years after the war. Some expected to feel closure. Instead, many felt something stranger. Silence. A silence that felt heavier than the bombing had ever been. Because the noise was gone. The smoke was gone. The chaos was gone. But the memories remained exactly where they had always been. One former Allied guard later wrote, "I stood where the gate had been. There was nothing there, no fence, no buildings, but I still knew exactly where the road hospital had been. I could still see them working." Another survivor described the same thing. He remembered the image that stayed with him long after the war. Not the explosions, not the fire, not the destruction, but the moment afterward. German nurses kneeling beside Allied soldiers. Allied guards carrying German prisoners on makeshift stretchers. Civilians being treated beside men who, only days earlier, had been their enemies. No one asking questions. No one checking insignia. No one giving orders. For a few hours, the war had stopped existing inside the camp. Not officially, not politically, not strategically, but practically, because survival had replaced everything else. One witness described it simply. For the first time, nobody cared who had won or lost. The only question was who was still alive. That image appeared again and again in personal accounts. Hands passing water between enemies. Blankets shared without hesitation. Medical supplies used without permission or inventory. At one point, a British guard reportedly held a flashlight while a German nurse performed a procedure beside the road. Neither spoke. Neither gave instructions. They simply worked. Later, when official investigations tried to reconstruct what had happened that day, they found something unusual. There were very few disciplinary reports. No documented conflicts between guards and prisoners during the crisis. No recorded attempts at retaliation. No violent incidents reported inside the camp after the bombing. Instead, the surviving notes described cooperation, improvised organization, shared responsibilities. But those records were incomplete. Some pages were missing. Some reports were unsigned. And several medical logs, including those written by Anna Keller and her team, were never located in the final archives. Historians later suggested several explanations. The documents may have been lost during transfers, misfiled, damaged, or simply discarded when the camp was dismantled. But some researchers believe there was another possibility. The reports described a situation that did not fit neatly into post-war narratives. Former enemies working together. Guards relying on prisoners. Prisoners organizing the camp. Authority structures collapsing and being replaced not by rebellion, but by cooperation. It was a story that complicated the simple lines of victory and defeat. And complicated stories are often the easiest to lose. Anna Keller never tried to correct the record. After the war, she returned to civilian life. She worked again as a nurse, later in a small regional hospital. Her personnel file described her as efficient, quiet, reliable. There were no public interviews, no memoir, no speeches. She did not attend reunions. She did not contact historians. Colleagues later said she rarely spoke about the war at all. When asked, she would give short answers, practical answers, never emotional ones. But one document did survive. Years after her death, a private letter was found among family papers. It was written to a former colleague. The letter mentioned the air raid only briefly. Just a few sentences. But one line stood out. The uniforms disappeared before the war did. Historians have debated what she meant. Some believe she was describing the moment when rank and nationality stopped mattering, when survival replaced identity. Others think she meant something more unsettling. that the system of control had vanished faster than anyone realized. That for a few hours, there had been no clear authority at all. Which brings us back to the question raised at the beginning. When the bombing destroyed the command buildings, when several officers were missing, when guard numbers were reduced, when the perimeter was damaged, and when prisoners were moving freely to carry the wounded, who was actually in control? The surviving reports suggest something unusual. There was no uprising, no escape attempt recorded during the peak of the chaos, no organized resistance. Instead, prisoners remained. They worked. They treated the wounded. They followed improvised medical priorities. They helped stabilize the camp. Some historians argue this showed discipline. Others believe exhaustion played a role. After years of war, captivity, and constant movement, survival may have mattered more than freedom. Another possibility is more complex. For a short time, the camp was controlled by necessity rather than authority. Decisions were made by whoever was closest to the problem, whoever had the skills, whoever had the strength left to act. In other words, control existed. But it did not come from rank. It came from function, from urgency, from cooperation. That kind of order leaves very little paperwork and almost no official structure, which may explain why the historical record feels incomplete. Even today, researchers disagree about how long the command system was actually disrupted. Some estimate a few hours. Others suggest more than a day passed before outside authorities fully restored control. But there is one detail that appears consistently across survivor accounts. No one gave a formal order for the prisoners to assist. No one officially reassigned authority. It simply happened because there was no alternative, and because the people involved understood something that war normally prevents. That survival does not recognize uniforms, that wounds do not recognize nationality, and that in extreme moments, identity becomes secondary to action. The land where the camp once stood remains quiet today. If you walk there early in the morning, you might hear only wind moving through the grass. No engines, no sirens, no voices. But for those who know the history, the silence feels different. Because the most important part of what happened there left no visible trace. No monument marks the moment when enemies worked side by side. No plaque describes the hours when authority disappeared. No memorial records the brief period when the war, inside that space, stopped functioning the way wars normally do. And that absence may be the most haunting detail of all. Because history usually remembers battles, victories, defeats, but it rarely preserves the moments when the rules temporarily stopped applying. Which brings us back to the image described by nearly every survivor. The road covered with stretchers, smoke drifting through broken walls, and among the ruins, German nurses, Allied guards, prisoners, civilians, working together, not because they were ordered to, but because there was no one left to give orders. So now the question remains: if authority disappears, if the chain of command collapses, if enemies begin helping each other without instruction, was that order? Was it chaos? Or was it something else entirely? Something that only appears when the systems of war break down. We may never know for certain, because the official reports never gave a clear answer. And some of the most important records were never found. So what do you think happened in those hours? Who was really in control? Order, chaos, or something far more human? Tell us your theory in the comments. Because sometimes the most important parts of history, are the ones that were never officially written.